First contact, tension and intrigue. The crystalline spires of Luminous City glittered in the pale light of twin moons, a breathtaking sight that usually filled Ambassador Zara Xenori with pride. Tonight, however, her inner eyelids flickered nervously as she gazed out the window of the High Council chamber. In mere moments, she would face the greatest challenge of her fledgling diplomatic career: Earth's first official delegation to Axora Prime. Zara's slender frame trembled slightly, her iridescent scales shifting from a calm blue to an anxious green. At just 30 solar cycles, she was young for an Axoran diplomat. Many had questioned First Minister Vox's decision to appoint her as liaison to the humans, but Zara was determined to prove her worth. Ambassador Xenori, a melodious voice chimed. They've arrived. Zara turned to face her assistant, Mira, whose bioluminescent patterns pulsed with excitement. Thank you, Mira. I suppose it's time. As they glided through the corridors of the council building, Zara attempted to calm her racing hearts. The reports on humans were unsettling. A young species, barely a century into interstellar travel, yet already carving out a significant presence in the galaxy. Their history was rife with conflict, their physiology built for endurance and aggression. Some Axoran conservatives even labeled them savages. But Zara had also read of human kindness, their capacity for love, their boundless creativity. It was her job to find common ground, to forge a lasting peace between their worlds. She couldn't afford to let fear cloud her judgment. The grand reception hall doors parted, and Zara steeled herself as she entered. A hush fell over the assembled Axoran dignitaries as the human delegation came into view. Zara's gaze was immediately drawn to the figure at the forefront, a tall, broad-shouldered male with close-cropped dark hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. First Minister Vox stepped forward, his aged scales shimmering with gravitas. On behalf of the Axoran people, I welcome you to our world. I am First Minister Vox, and this, he gestured to Zara, is Ambassador Zara Xenori, who will be your primary liaison during your stay. Zara inclined her head in the traditional Axoran greeting, trying to ignore the way her scales flushed a deeper green under the intense scrutiny of the human leader. The man stepped forward, his movements controlled yet fluid, radiating barely contained energy. Commander Jack Harper, representing the United Earth Government. On behalf of humanity, we thank you for your hospitality. His voice was deep, with a rough edge that sent an unexpected shiver down Zara's spine. As pleasantries were exchanged, Zara found herself studying Commander Harper. His face was all sharp angles and flat planes, so alien compared to Axoran features. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, hinting at a violent past. Yet there was intelligence in those blue eyes, and something else, a weariness, perhaps, that spoke of burdens carried. The formal introductions complete, Zara approached the commander. I hope you'll find your accommodations satisfactory, Commander Harper. If there's anything you need, please don't hesitate to ask. Harper's lips quirked in what might have been a smile. Thank you, Ambassador. I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm more interested in getting down to business. When can we begin discussing the treaty? Zara blinked, taken aback by his directness. Well, we had planned a tour of the city for tomorrow, followed by a cultural exchange dinner. The formal negotiations weren't scheduled to begin until the day after. Harper's eyes narrowed slightly. With all due respect, Ambassador, we didn't come halfway across the galaxy for sightseeing. Every moment we delay puts both our peoples at risk. Surely a day to acclimate and learn about each other would be beneficial. Zara countered, struggling to maintain her diplomatic composure. We can learn about each other while we work, Harper said firmly. The Krelax aren't going to wait politely while we swap stories and eat fancy dinners. Zara felt her scales flush hot, with a mixture of embarrassment and indignation. The Krelax, a warlike species encroaching on both human and Axoran territory, were the very reason this alliance was so crucial. But surely the humans understood the importance of protocol and cultural understanding. Before she could formulate a response, First Minister Vox intervened smoothly. Perhaps a compromise, Commander. We'll abbreviate tomorrow's activities and move the start of negotiations forward. I'm sure Ambassador Ori can make the necessary arrangements. Harper nodded curtly. That would be acceptable. Thank you, Minister. He turned that intense gaze back to Zara. I look forward to working with you, Ambassador. I hope you're prepared for some long days ahead. As the human delegation was led away to their quarters, Zara felt a complex swirl of emotions. Anxiety at the abrupt change of plans, frustration at Harper's brusque manner, and underneath it all, a strange, unwelcome flutter of excitement. Mira approached, her pattern swirling with concern. Are you all right, Ambassador? That human, the commander, he seems rather intense. Zara took a deep breath, willing her scales back to a professional shade of blue. I'm fine, Mira. The commander is not what I expected. But this is why I'm here, isn't it? To bridge the gap between our cultures. As she left the reception hall, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully laid plans were already unraveling. Commander Jack Harper was a force of nature, as unpredictable and potentially destructive as the plasma storms that sometimes ravaged Axoris poles. How could she hope to connect with someone so fundamentally different? Yet a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that perhaps those differences were exactly what made humans so fascinating. Their adaptability, their drive, their passion, qualities that had propelled them to the stars in an eye blink of cosmic time. Zara shook her head, banishing such thoughts. She had work to do, a schedule to rearrange, a peace to negotiate. Whatever her personal feelings about Commander Harper, she had a duty to her people. She would not let them down. As she worked late into the night, preparing for the accelerated negotiations, Zara found her thoughts continually drifting back to those piercing blue eyes and the challenge they represented. Little did she know that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test her skills, her beliefs, and her heart in ways she could never have imagined. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, and the key to peace lay in the unlikely connection between a fearless human commander and a shy alien diplomat who was only beginning to discover her own strength. Diplomatic dance, negotiations, and hidden agendas. The first rays of Axora's golden sun had barely crested the horizon when Zara received an urgent message. Commander Harper was requesting an immediate meeting, well before the day's scheduled activities were set to begin. Stifling a yawn, she'd had precious little sleep after rearranging the entire diplomatic itinerary. Zara hurried to the human delegation's quarters. She found Harper in the common area, poring over a holographic display of local star charts. He looked up as she entered, and Zara was struck by how alert he seemed despite the early hour. "Good morning, Ambassador," he said, his voice gravelly. "I hope I'm not disturbing your beauty sleep." Zara's scales flushed a light pink at what she assumed was meant to be a joke. Humor was still a challenging aspect of human communication for her. "Not at all, Commander. How can I assist you?" Harper gestured to the star chart. "I've been reviewing the proposed neutral zone between Axoran and human space. The buffer against the Krulax incursions is insufficient." Zara blinked, caught off guard. This was a topic scheduled for much later in the negotiations. "I see. Perhaps we could discuss this during today's formal session." "Why wait?" Harper's blue eyes locked onto hers, intense and unyielding. "Lives are at stake, Ambassador. Every day we delay gives the Krulax another opportunity to strike." Zara felt her hearts quicken, both from the urgency in Harper's voice and his proximity. She took a steadying breath. "Commander, I understand your concern, but there are protocols." "Protocols won't save your people or mine when the Krulax come knocking," Harper interrupted, his jaw clenching. "We need action, not bureaucracy." For a moment, Zara felt a flash of irritation. Did this human think the Axorans didn't understand the threat, that they weren't equally committed to protecting their people? She straightened, meeting Harper's gaze directly. "With all due respect, Commander," she said, her voice firmer than she'd intended, The Axaran people have faced threats long before humanity reached the stars. Our protocols exist for good reasons. Rushed decisions in matters of galactic diplomacy can have catastrophic consequences. Harper's eyebrows rose slightly, and Zara feared she'd overstepped. But then his lips quirked in what might have been a smile. "Well, well," he murmured. "There's some fire in you after all, Ambassador." Before Zara could respond, a chime announced the arrival of the rest of the human delegation. The moment passed, but Zara felt oddly energized by the exchange. Perhaps there was hope for understanding between them after all. The abbreviated tour of Luminous City proceeded smoothly, though Zara noticed Harper's attention seemed divided. His eyes constantly scanned their surroundings, as though searching for hidden threats. It was only when they reached the ancient Hall of Ancestors that she saw genuine interest spark in his gaze. "Incredible," Harper murmured, studying the towering crystalline structures that house the collective memories of generations of Axarans. "Your people can actually access the experiences of your ancestors." Zara nodded, pleased by his curiosity. "In a limited fashion, yes. It's a sacred rite, performed only at significant moments in an Axaran's life." "Fascinating," Harper said softly. "To carry the wisdom of your entire species with you, it must be a powerful thing." "It is," Zara agreed. "But it can also be a burden. The weight of expectation, the fear of disappointing those who came before." Harper's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Zara felt a flash of connection. Did humans feel that same weight of legacy? The moment was broken by the arrival of First Minister Vox, announcing it was time for the formal negotiations to begin. As they made their way to the council chambers, Zara felt a mix of anticipation and dread. The real challenge was about to begin. Hours passed in a flurry of proposals, counter-proposals, and heated debates. Zara found herself constantly challenged by Harper's aggressive negotiating style. He pushed for greater military cooperation, for shared technology, for joint operations against the Krelax. The Axaran delegation, more accustomed to cautious, incremental diplomacy, struggled to keep pace. As the first day of negotiations drew to a close, Zara felt exhausted but oddly exhilarated. She'd held her own against Harper's relentless arguments, even earning grudging nods of approval from some of the elder Axaran diplomats. Just as they were about to adjourn, however, an aide rushed in, whispering urgently to First Minister Vox. The old Axaran scales paled to a sickly gray. "We've received a distress call from one of our outer colonies," Vox announced, his voice grave. "It seems the Krelax have launched an attack." The room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Zara felt a cold dread settle in her stomachs. This changed everything. Harper's voice cut through the chaos. "Minister, Ambassador, we need to act now. Let my ships assist in the defense of your colony. Show the Krelax that humanity and the Axarans stand together." Vox hesitated, looking to Zara. She knew what he was thinking. Accepting human military aid without a formalized treaty was unprecedented, potentially dangerous. But the lives of her people were at stake. "I agree with Commander Harper," Zara said, her voice steadier than she felt. "We must act swiftly and decisively." As preparations were made and orders given, Harper approached Zara. "Good call, Ambassador," he said quietly. "I know that wasn't an easy decision." Zara nodded, still processing the rapid turn of events. The Krelax must have known about these negotiations. This attack, it's too convenient to be coincidence. Harper's expression darkened. "I was thinking the same thing. We may have a bigger problem on our hands than just an alien invasion." As they worked late into the night, coordinating the joint defense effort, Zara found herself studying Harper. His focus was absolute, his strategic mind impressive. She began to understand why Earth had chosen him for this mission. Despite their differences, she was glad to have him by her side in this crisis. But as reports came in of the battle raging at the colony, Zara couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. How had the Krelax known exactly when to strike? Were their forces at work beyond what either humans or Axarans understood? As the twin moons of Axor rose over a city now gripped with fear and uncertainty, Zara realized that her greatest challenges, and perhaps her greatest opportunities, lay ahead. The dance of diplomacy had become a battle for survival, and the steps were about to become far more complex. Crisis point: betrayal and action. The command center of Luminous City thrummed with tension. Holographic displays flickered with real-time updates from the besieged colony, each new report more dire than the last. Zara stood at the center of the storm, her scales a turbulent mix of colors reflecting her inner turmoil. "The Krelax have breached the colony's outer defenses," she announced, her voice tight. "Our forces are overwhelmed." Commander Harper's jaw clenched as he studied the tactical display. "Where the hell are my ships? They should have arrived by now." As if in answer, a new alert blared. Zara's assistant, Mira, rushed to a console, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing with alarm. "Ambassador, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." The main screen flickered to life, revealing the haggard face of a human officer. "This is Captain Chen of the UES Horizon. We've been ambushed by Krelax forces en route to the colony. Multiple ships damaged or destroyed. We can't break through." Zara felt the floor drop out from under her. How could the Krelax have known exactly where to intercept the human relief force? The implications were staggering and terrifying. Harper's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. "Captain, hold your position. We'll find a way to get reinforcements to you." He turned to Zara, his blue eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and determination. "We've been played. Someone leaked our plans to the Krelax." "Impossible." First Minister Vox interjected, his aged scales pale with shock. "The mission details were known only to those in this room and a handful of our most trusted officials." "Then one of those trusted officials isn't so trustworthy," Harper growled. Zara felt sick. The idea of an Axoran betraying their people to the Krelax was almost unthinkable, yet the evidence was undeniable. "What do we do?" she asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Harper's gaze locked onto hers, and Zara was struck by the intensity she saw there. "We improvise," he said firmly. "Ambassador, I need access to your fastest ship and a small team of your best people. We're going to punch a hole through that Krelax blockade and get help to your colony." "You can't be serious," Vox sputtered. "It's suicide." "It's our only shot," Harper countered. He turned back to Zara. "What do you say, Ambassador? Ready to get your hands dirty?" Zara hesitated. Everything in her training screamed against such a reckless plan. But as she looked at the desperate faces around her, at the colony burning on the tactical displays, she knew there was only one choice. "I'm coming with you," she said, squaring her shoulders. Harper's eyebrows shot up. "It'll be dangerous." "It's my people out there," Zara replied, surprised by the steel in her own voice. "I won't ask anyone to take risks I'm not willing to take myself." A slow smile spread across Harper's face, the first genuine one Zara had seen from him. "All right then, Ambassador. Let's save your people." The next few hours passed in a blur of frenetic activity. Zara found herself aboard the Starblade, Axor's most advanced scout ship, surrounded by a hand-picked team of Axoran elite guards and human special forces. As they prepared to depart, First Minister Vox approached her. "Are you certain about this, Zara?" he asked quietly. "No one would think less of you for staying behind." Zara met his gaze steadily. "I'm certain, Minister. This is where I need to be." Vox nodded, a mix of pride and worry in his eyes. "May the ancestors watch over you." As the Starblade streaked into Axora's upper atmosphere, Zara felt a curious mix of terror and exhilaration. She'd never been in real combat before, had never even left the safety of her homeworld. Yet here she was, about to dive into the heart of a war zone. Having second thoughts, Harper's voice came from behind her. Zara turned to face him, noticing the way he moved with easy confidence, even in the ship's artificial gravity. "No," she said honestly, "but I am apprehensive. I'm not a soldier, Commander. Harper's expression softened slightly. None of us are born soldiers, Ambassador. We become what we need to be when the moment calls for it. He paused, studying her. You've got more strength in you than you realize. I've seen it. Before Zara could respond, alarms blared throughout the ship. Multiple Krelax vessels on intercept course. The pilot shouted. Here we go, Harper muttered, strapping himself into a jump seat. Hope you're ready for some excitement, Ambassador. The next minutes were a chaos of evasive maneuvers, weapons fire, and shouted orders. Zara clung to her seat, her hearts racing as energy blasts rocked the Starblade. Through it all, Harper remained a steady presence, calling out tactical suggestions to the Axaren pilot with preternatural calm. Just when it seemed they might break through, a lucky shot from a Krelax cruiser struck one of the Starblade's engines. The ship lurched violently, alarms screaming. We're losing power, the pilot yelled. We can't take another hit like that. Zara's mind raced. They were so close to the colony, but without engines, they were sitting ducks. Then an idea struck her, a desperate, possibly suicidal idea. The plasma vents, she said, turning to Harper. If we vent our plasma reserves, the radiation could mask our signature long enough to slip past the Krelax ships. Harper's eyes widened. It would also leave us dead in space if it doesn't work. Do we have a choice? Zara countered. For a moment, Harper just stared at her. Then a slow grin spread across his face. I'll be damned. Looks like you've got some savage in you after all, Ambassador. He turned to the pilot. Do it. The next moments were a blur of blinding light and gut-wrenching maneuvers. Zara felt consciousness slipping away as the G-forces mounted. The last thing she saw before blackness took her was Harper's face, his expression a mixture of concern and something else, something that made her hearts skip a beat despite the chaos around them. When Zara came to, she found herself in the colony's medical bay, surrounded by the sounds of the wounded and dying. Harper sat nearby, a bandage on his forehead, but otherwise looking unharmed. Welcome back, Ambassador, he said softly. You missed all the fun. Zara tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in her head. The colony? Did we? Harper nodded. We made it. Your crazy plan worked. The reinforcements arrived just in time to drive the Krelax back. Relief washed over Zara, but it was short-lived. The traitor, did we learn who? Harper's expression darkened. Not yet, but we will. And when we do, he left the threat unspoken. As Zara looked around at the aftermath of the battle, at the mixing of human and Axaren medical personnel working together to save lives, she felt a profound shift in her perspective. This crisis had changed everything. Her view of the humans, her understanding of the threat they faced, and most of all, her view of herself. She met Harper's gaze, seeing the same realization reflected there. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The shy diplomat and the hardened soldier, united by circumstance, but bound by something deeper, a shared commitment to their peoples, and a growing trust in each other. As the first rays of Axora's sun peeked through the colony's battered dome, Zara knew that this was only the beginning. The real challenges, and perhaps the real opportunities, lay ahead. Understanding. Bridges built and barriers broken. The days following the battle for the colony were a whirlwind of activity. As the wounded were tended to and defenses rebuilt, Zara found herself thrust into a new role, no longer just a diplomat, but a symbol of Axoran resilience and human Axoran cooperation. She stood now in the colony's makeshift command center, studying the latest intelligence reports with Commander Harper. The victories they'd won came at a heavy cost, and the shadow of betrayal still loomed large. We've narrowed down the list of potential leaks, Harper said, his voice low to avoid being overheard. But we're still missing something. The Krelax shouldn't have been able to coordinate their attacks this precisely, even with inside information. Zara nodded, her scales shifting to a thoughtful blue. I've been thinking about that. What if it's not just one traitor we're dealing with? What if there's a conspiracy involving both our peoples? Harper's eyebrows rose. That's a dangerous accusation, Ambassador. Are you sure you want to go down that road? I'm sure we can't afford to ignore the possibility, Zara replied firmly. She'd come a long way from the timid diplomat who'd first met the human delegation. The crisis had forced her to find strength she never knew she possessed. A ghost of a smile played across Harper's lips. All right then, let's follow this thread and see where it leads us. As they dove deeper into their investigation, Zara found herself working more closely with Harper than ever before. Despite their different backgrounds and approaches, they'd developed an easy rapport, each complementing the other's strengths. Late one night, as they pored over communication logs in Zora's makeshift office, she found herself studying Harper's profile. The harsh lines of his face had softened somewhat in the dim light, and she was struck by how weary he looked. "You should rest, Commander," she said softly. "You've been pushing yourself too hard." Harper looked up, a wry smile on his face. "Pot, kettle. Ambassador, when's the last time you slept?" Zara's scales flushed a light pink. "Fair point. But I'm not the one who took a Krulax energy blast to the shoulder yesterday." "It was just a graze," Harper protested, but he winced as he shifted in his chair. Concern overrode Zara's usual reserve. She moved closer, her hand hovering near his injured shoulder. "May I?" "Axaran biology is different, but I have some medical training." After a moment's hesitation, Harper nodded. Zara gently placed her hand on his shoulder, her scales tingling at the contact. She closed her eyes, focusing on the subtle energies that flowed through all living things. "Your people's medical technology is impressive," she murmured, "but it doesn't account for the unique stress patterns in human musculature. Here, let me." She applied gentle pressure, her fingers moving in small circles. Harper let out a low groan of relief. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked, his voice husky. Zara opened her eyes, suddenly very aware of their proximity. "It's an old Axaran technique. We believe that understanding another's pain is the first step to healing it." Their gazes locked, and for a moment, the air between them seemed charged with possibility. Then an alert chimed, shattering the moment. "Incoming transmission from Luminous City," the computer announced. They sprang apart, both flustered. Harper cleared his throat. "We should, probably take that." The face that appeared on the screen belonged to Mira, Zora's assistant. Her bioluminescent patterns pulsed with urgency. "Ambassador, Commander, we've uncovered something alarming. There's been a series of encrypted transmissions between high-ranking officials on both Axaran and Earth. We can't decode the content, but the pattern matches known Krulax communication protocols." Zara felt her heart sink. Their fears of a wider conspiracy seemed to be coming true. Harper's expression hardened. "Send us everything you have. And Mira, be careful who you trust with this information." As the transmission ended, Zara slumped into her chair. "It's worse than we thought. If there are traitors at the highest levels of both our governments, then nowhere is safe," Harper finished grimly. "We need to take this directly to the top. Your First Minister and my President need to know." Zara nodded, but a new worry gnawed at her. "Jack," she said softly, using his first name for the first time. "What if they're involved? What if we can't trust anyone but each other?" The use of his name didn't escape Harper's notice. His expression softened as he met her gaze. "Then we'll face it together, Zara. Whatever comes next, I got your back." The sincerity in his voice made Zora's heart flutter. She realized with a start that somewhere along the way, this gruff human soldier had become more than just an ally. He'd become someone she trusted implicitly, someone she cared for. As if reading her thoughts, Harper reached out, his hand covering hers. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver through her. "We should get some rest," he said quietly. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." Zara nodded, reluctant to break the moment but knowing he was right. As they prepared to leave the office, Harper paused at the door. "Zara, he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "I just want you to know, working with you, seeing your strength and compassion, it's changed how I see your people, how I see everything." Zara felt her scales flush with emotion. "The feeling is mutual, Jack. I never imagined I could find such understanding with a human, with anyone." They stood there for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Then Harper smiled, a genuine, warm expression that made Zora's heart skip. "Get some sleep, Ambassador. We've got a galaxy to save tomorrow." As Zora prepared for bed that night, her mind raced with the implications of their discovery and the growing complexity of her feelings for Jack Harper. She knew that the coming days would test them both in ways they couldn't imagine. But for the first time since this crisis began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The shy alien diplomat and the battle-hardened human commander, bridging the gap between their worlds and forging a bond stronger than either of them had ever dreamed possible. Resolution. Unity forged in fire. The Axoran sun had barely risen when Zara and Jack set their plan in motion. With evidence of high-level corruption on both Earth and Axora, they couldn't risk going through official channels. Instead, they assembled a small team of trusted individuals from both species, those who had proven their loyalty during the recent crisis. "Remember," Jack briefed the group, his voice low and intense, "we're not just fighting the Krelax anymore. We're up against traitors within our own ranks. Trust no one outside this room." Zara nodded, her scales a determined blue. "Our mission is twofold: expose the conspiracy and stop the Krelax invasion force that our intel suggests is massing at the edge of our system." As the team dispersed to their assigned tasks, Jack pulled Zara aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Once we start, there's no going back. We'll be branded as traitors ourselves if we're wrong." Zara met his gaze steadily. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Jack. Our people's future depends on this." A small smile tugged at Jack's lips. "You've come a long way from the shy diplomat I first met." "I had a good teacher," Zara replied, her scales flushing slightly. Their moment was interrupted by an urgent call from Mira. "Ambassador, Commander, we've decrypted part of the transmissions. It's worse than we thought. The conspirators aren't just passing information to the Krelax. They're actively sabotaging our defenses." Jack's expression hardened. "Time to move. Zara, you take your team to secure the planetary defense grid. I'll lead the strike on the conspirators' headquarters." As they prepared to part ways, Zara felt a sudden surge of emotion. Without thinking, she reached out and grasped Jack's hand. "Be careful," she said softly. Jack's fingers intertwined with hers, the warmth of his touch sending a shiver through her. "You too," he murmured. For a moment, they stood there, neither willing to let go. Then, with a final squeeze, they separated, each heading to their respective missions. The next hours were a blur of tense confrontations and narrow escapes. Zara's team raced to reactivate the sabotaged defense systems, fighting off both Krelax infiltrators and corrupted Axoran security forces. Her diplomatic skills were put to the test as she convinced wavering officials to join their cause, her impassioned pleas cutting through years of mistrust and propaganda. Meanwhile, Jack's strike force engaged in a running battle through the streets of Luminous City, closing in on the conspiracy's nerve center. The human commander's tactical brilliance shone as he outmaneuvered forces that outnumbered and outgunned his team. As the twin moons of Axora rose, casting an eerie glow over the embattled city, Zara received the news she'd been dreading. The Krelax invasion fleet had entered the system, vastly outnumbering the combined Axoran and human forces. "We're out of time," she told her team, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomachs. "We have to get those defenses online now, or everything we've fought for is lost." With a final, desperate push, they breached the main control room. Zara's fingers flew over the alien console, applying everything she'd learned about human computer systems to bypass the sabotaged protocols. Warning klaxons blared as the massive planetary cannons began to power up. "Zara," Jack's voice crackled over the comm. "We've secured the conspirators, but a Krelak strike team is heading your way. Hold on, we're coming to you." Gritting her teeth, Zara focused on completing the defense activation sequence. The sound of energy weapons and shouts grew closer. Just as the system came online, the doors burst open. Zara whirled, finding herself face to face with a towering Krelax warrior. Time seemed to slow. Zara saw the alien's weapon rising, knew she had no chance to dodge. She closed her eyes, bracing for the impact that never came. A familiar voice cried out in pain. Zara's eyes snapped open to see Jack collapsing in front of her, having taken the blast meant for her. "No!" The scream tore from her throat as she caught Jack's falling form. Around her, the room erupted into chaos as both sides engaged in close-quarters combat. Cradling Jack's head in her lap, Zara felt a surge of something primal and powerful. All her fear and hesitation burned away, replaced by a fierce determination. She looked up at the advancing Krelax, her eyes blazing. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying an authority that made even the alien warriors pause. "Look around you. Look at what we've accomplished together, humans and Axorans. United, we've uncovered your plots, turned back your fleets. This ends now." To everyone's amazement, the Krelax leader lowered his weapon slightly. "You speak with courage, little one," he growled, "but words will not save you." "Then let our actions speak," Zara countered. She gestured to the displays showing the massive planetary defenses coming online, the combined Axoran human fleet moving to engage the Krelax armada. "You came here expecting to find two fractured, mistrustful species. Instead, you forged an alliance stronger than either of us could have imagined. Leave now, and we can still avoid further bloodshed." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the Krelax leader lowered his weapon completely. Perhaps there is wisdom in your words, Axoran. We will withdraw. For now." As the Krelax forces began their retreat, Zara turned her attention back to Jack. His eyes fluttered open, a weak smile on his lips. "Did we win?" he mumbled. Zara felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "We did. Thanks to you, you foolish, brave human." In the days that followed, as both Axora and Earth came to terms with the averted crisis and the exposed conspiracy, Zara found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. There were debriefings to attend, speeches to give, a new era of cooperation to help shape. But through it all, she never strayed far from Jack's bedside as he recovered. It was there, in the quiet moments between the chaos, that they finally addressed the unspoken feelings that had grown between them. "So," Jack said one evening, his strength returning but his voice still soft, "where do we go from here, Ambassador?" Zara took his hand, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "There's still so much work to be done, so many bridges to build between our peoples." "True," Jack agreed. "But I'd say we've made a pretty good start, wouldn't you?" Zara smiled, her scales shimmering with a mix of emotions. "We have. And whatever comes next, I'm glad I'll be facing it with you." As they gazed out at the Axoran sunset, the first stars of evening twinkling to life, Zara felt a profound sense of hope. The road ahead would not be easy, but they had proven that even the greatest divides could be bridged, that understanding and unity could emerge from the crucible of crisis. The shy alien diplomat and the battle-hardened human commander had found something neither expected, in each other and in the shared struggle that had brought their peoples together. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for both their species and perhaps for the galaxy itself. As Jack's fingers intertwined with hers, Zara knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them together. Two hearts, two worlds, united in a bond that transcended the stars themselves.